Hello, hello. How is everybody? So I have to admit, I was just talking to Chiago before I stepped up here, and I'm pretty nervous. And I'm not quite certain why. Maybe it's because I have no idea what Luis just said about me. Maybe it's because I'm a little bit sleep deprived, but I think more than anything it's because this is such a magnificent opportunity to be here in front of you, to be here with you, and to learn with you this afternoon. So before I jump into my talk about why I'm here, I'd love to hear why you're here. Could you raise your hand and just yell out, shout out to the group why you're here? Don't be shy, this is the Unreasonable Institute we're talking about. I know there's a hand. Yes. To meet ideas and people. Perfect. Anybody else? Yes. Learn. Love it. That's why I'm here as well. Anybody else? Let's get two more. Yes.
To know how to do.
To know how to do, to know how to create. Yes, absolutely. How about this side of the room? Yes.
To share.
To share. To share. To meet people, to share ideas, to learn how to create. I think that if we were to put all of this under one umbrella, we put it under this acronym, which is CTFW. This is a mantra that we live by at the Unreasonable Institute, and it stands for one thing. It stands for to change the fucking world. Now, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. That's a little foolhardy, that's a little naive, that's a little bit too ambitious, but trust me, it feels good to say it. So I want you to say it with me on a count of 3. Why are we here today? To change the fucking world. One more time, a little bit louder. Why are we here? To change the fucking world. That is so much fun. Thank you. So today I'm gonna talk a lot about a lot of little things. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about the Unreasonable Institute. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about myself. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about what it takes to become lucky and why I think that's so important. A little bit about risk, a little bit about failure, and ultimately a little bit about people. So bear with me, there's a lot of little bits to this talk, but I hope that at the end we can walk away with this with one larger understanding, and that is the importance of being unreasonable. And actually, the slide is a little bit out of order. We'll start here. So this, oftentimes when we talk about CTFW, and when we talk about making an impact, we see things like this, right? I don't know if you can read this in the back, but it's in a math equation. It's incredibly complicated at the front, and there's a beautiful, elegant solution at the back end. And in the middle, it says, then a miracle occurs. And below that, one of the mathematicians says, I think you should be more explicit in step 2. And oftentimes when we think about defining progress in our time, when we think about creating wide-scale global change, this is what we're told, right? It's left up to the fringes of human potential, to the rare few individuals who have somehow risen above everybody else, are saints, and have created wild change, the Martin Luther Kings, the Rosa Parks. But the truth is, something we fundamentally believe at the Unreasonable Institute is that this isn't good enough. In a world where 2 billion people live on less than $2 a day, where 1 billion don't have access to clean water, leaving progress up to miracles does not count, and it is not enough. So what does? Luck does. So when we look at success, we quickly, myself and colleagues at the Unreasonable Institute, we wanted to look at a number of entrepreneurs who had been wildly successful. We wanted to know what was the one attribute, one correlation that reigned true for all of them, and surprisingly, is luck. Richard Branson's here saying, I'm the luckiest guy alive. Bill Gates says, I attribute my success to luck and good fortune. Evan Williams, who's the founder of Twitter, if you're going to achieve great things, luck must be on your side. So something we're going to explore today is this idea of luck. And I'd like to start with an experiment. Actually, can I use this mic? Yeah? Oh, that's way better. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, so this is kind of a wild experiment. This is done by Dr. Weissman. He's a scientist out of the UK, and for 8 years, he studied this notion and this idea of luck. And the question that he asked was, can we teach luck? Can people actually become lucky? Or is this just something that you're born with, right? Are you born with a gray cloud over your head and nothing good ever happens to you? Do you know people who it just seems like everything always works out? Or is there something really scientific here? And can we teach it? So let me begin with this experiment. So imagine now 5 years from now, you're no longer in Brazil. You're certainly not sitting in this auditorium, and you're in New York City. and you're on Wall Street. Right? You didn't think you would go there. You thought you were going to change the world, but you ended up in finance. You're now an iBanker, and you're doing incredibly well. You're doing magnificent things, and you're rising up through the ranks. And your boss, the one person who's ahead of you at the company, says, hey, I really need you to cash this check today. You need to go to the bank. This check is a big check. It's a $10 million check. And you have to go down to the bank before the markets close. So you grab the check, you run downstairs, you get to the sidewalk, big city, New York, you run across the street to the massive bank, right? You walk into the bank and there's... Oh. That's the video that's coming up in a minute. Oh. Should I just... What do you want to tell? Okay, we're back. So, that's luck, right? Yeah, it's good luck. All right. So, you walk into the bank, right, and there's this huge line, and you're really busy, but you have to wait in line. There's only one teller. The other one was sick. And so you're waiting in line. 20 minutes later, you finally get to the front of the line, and all of a sudden, you hear this loud commotion. Bam! There's a bank robber who breaks into the bank, right? He's got 2 huge guns, and he yells at everybody. He goes, this is a stick-up, listen up. And he starts shooting his guns, right? Pop, 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 pop. And he's shooting them. He's shooting them into the air, though. He's actually not a bad guy. He's just trying to scare everybody. So he shoots these guns up into the air, and one of the bullets, it ricochets off this marble pillar. It hits... It always happens with AV. Oh, no problem. Maybe I could just talk over that. What do you guys think? Yeah? Keep going? Okay. Well, maybe we should give it a second. The voice that you're hearing is my co-founder, Teju Ravilochan. This is actually a big part of luck. What we'll talk about is perspective. And I'll get to that in this story. Oh. There we go. Sounds good. All right, we're back. Yeah? Game on? You guys ready? All right, this is helping with the nerves. So the bullet, it ricochets off a pillar, right? It hits a wall, and it ricochets off that marble, and it hits you in the left arm, right? You get shot. You got shot. And as you would imagine, it hurts more than you ever thought it could, and you pass out from the pain. Right? You wake up 2 days later, you're in the hospital. You're alive. You got shot in the left arm. You wake up, though, what goes through your mind? Are you lucky or are you unlucky? So I'd love to see with a show of hands, who here thinks that they're unlucky? Don't be shy. Yes. And why are you unlucky? You got shot, right? The odds of getting shot are pretty slim. Bank robbers aren't common. You got shot. That's right. Anybody else who thinks they're unlucky? Yes. And you lost $10 million. Hopefully you didn't lose that money, but you did get shot, and you didn't get to cash it. That's right. Over here on the right side. Yeah, you had a responsibility and you couldn't fulfill it. Anybody else who here thinks they're unlucky? Wow, this is a very, yes. Wrong place, wrong time, right? Odds are very slim. Okay, so who here thinks that you're lucky? Who wakes up in the hospital and says, hey, I'm pretty lucky? Yes. You're still alive. That's right? Because you got shot here and your heart's here and you lived through it. That's right. Yes. You still have the other arm. It's an important thing, right? Yeah. 1 of 2. That's not bad. Who else? Who here thinks that they're lucky? Yes. What was that? The check is still in your pocket. That's right. You didn't deposit it yet. Maybe it's not so bad. Okay, who else here thinks they're lucky? Let's go one more. Yes. Vacation. That's right. You probably get 2 weeks off because you got shot. Interesting. So this story was actually part of a scientific study. And in that study, they surveyed 1,000 different people. And they asked them, do you think you're lucky or do you think you're unlucky? And the story was better articulated than what I just did. But throughout that experiment, it was really amazing. Actually, the most common answer was that they were unlucky, which is surprising. This is a very lucky room. It was over 60% of the individuals who answered that survey said, you know what, I'm pretty unlucky. I got shot. Right? And people don't often get shot. It hurt really bad. I'm in the hospital. I'm out of work for a couple weeks. This is no good. And then on the other average, which was just under 40%, were people who said that they're lucky. Right? And they're lucky because they're alive. Right? Their heart is right here. They made it. Maybe they get a couple weeks off of work. Maybe they get a good story. Where this study, though, becomes really interesting is on the standard deviations off from the average. Right? And on this side of the bell curve, you have people who are incredibly unlucky, who they look at you and they say, there's no way you can even say that you are lucky. Oh, okay. There's no way that you could even say that you are lucky because mathematically it is almost impossible that you got shot, right? The odds that you were in the exact wrong place at the exact wrong time. The robber didn't even mean to shoot you. Robbers don't even exist anymore today. The odds are 1 out of a trillion, right? And these people, they'll get upset with you if you say that you're lucky. They'll think that you're dumb. They'll think that you're not thinking this through because you can't be lucky in this situation. And then on the other side of the standard deviation are the crazies, right, who wake up in the hospital, and not only do they say, I'm lucky because I'm alive, they say, I'm so lucky, this is awesome, right? I got shot by a bank robber. I have the best story in the world, right? Nobody gets shot by bank robbers. This is incredible. And now what's amazing about this study, and even about your answers within the audience, is that everybody was exposed to the exact same situation, right? The same thing happened to all of you, and yet some people they can say that they're so unlucky that you can't even say you are lucky. Mathematically, it's impossible. And on the other side, you can have people who think that it's awesome that they got shot. So a huge key to luck is perspective. And we'll go into luck a little bit more throughout this talk. This is the patron saint of the Unreasonable Institute. This is George Bernard Shaw. And George Bernard Shaw is famous for saying that the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in adapting the world to himself. Therefore, all progress is dependent on the unreasonable person. Unreasonable people are the type of people that we at the Unreasonable Institute hedge our bets on. We work with 25 entrepreneurs every single summer. They're incredibly unreasonable. Like many of you, they persist through failure. They persist through skepticism, and they're trying to achieve things that nobody else has achieved before them. They're wielding business as a mechanism to combat social and environmental ills, and our job at the Unreasonable Institute is to help them along. Now, I have a pretty big challenge, which is to describe to you exactly what it is we do at the Unreasonable Institute. And it's tough because this is actually our business plan. We had a 120-page document that was confusing and convoluted and nobody can understand it. And so we tried to boil it down to something really simple, which was this doodle. But potentially the best way to describe the Unreasonable Institute is through an analogy, and that's through penguins. The penguins are known as nature's best incubator. They spend over 100 days in the frigid Arctic cold, standing with no food and no water to do one thing, as to give birth and to bear the next generation of penguins. And this is really our goal at the Unreasonable Institute, to facilitate and accelerate the next generation of entrepreneurs. And our goal is to become one of the best incubators in the world for this next generation of entrepreneurs. So where it starts for us is here. We work with young entrepreneurs. They're early stage. Right? Maybe they have 5,000 customers, but the question we're trying to help them answer is how do they scale up to 1 million customers? They all have operational teams, but typically this is 2 or 3 teammates, and they're just at that point in time when they're about to scale, where they're about to grow their business, and our job is to get them there quicker. We do that through mentorship, as illustrated by the large penguins. We bring together 50 mentors. We are a mentor-driven program. We don't have a curriculum. Instead, we bring in entrepreneurs who have achieved the scale that our entrepreneurs are pledging to achieve themselves someday. So these mentors range from Paul Polak, who's credited for bringing over 20 million people out of poverty, to the co-founder of Google.org, the founder of Wild Oats, head of global brand and marketing at Coca-Cola, an entrepreneur who's started over 19 companies, raised over $2 billion. These are incredible individuals, and they come in and they actually live with our entrepreneurs. But beyond that, for us, it's about creating a global community and a global network. And in this way, we source our entrepreneurs from all around the world. We brought this past summer 26 entrepreneurs working on ventures in 17 countries. The summer before that, we had 22 entrepreneurs working on ventures in 15 countries. We believe that there's nothing more important than this, which is creating a community amongst our mentors, amongst funders, and amongst our entrepreneurs. So ultimately, if we were to sum up what we do at the Unreasonable Institute, is to go from this to this. And our goal is to give our entrepreneurs wings and to let their ventures really take flight. But rather than just ramble on and tell you what we do, as illustrated with penguins, I thought that it'd be best to briefly show you. So this is a video of the Unreasonable Institute, and hopefully it will queue up. Maybe it will. No longer just localized and regional. They're international at a global scale. We need a place where young people can just shy of 3,000 people from over 130 countries voted with their dollars to say that these entrepreneurs wanted a seat at the Unreasonable Institute in Boulder this summer.
With the exception of microfinance, nobody has made money off of a social enterprise.
Our world doesn't really prepare you for failure.
Ever since I have been a child,
who is the government to define progress for us, when that progress does not reach everyone?
It was the first time that for 10 weeks consecutively, people didn't tell me to get a real job.
I'm a product designer that believes there are solutions to global problems through design.
For the first time in human history, we have the opportunity to completely eradicate absolute poverty in a financially sustainable way.
And the community here has been phenomenal.
You have lunch with somebody from Pakistan, then you go and chat with somebody from France, and then you have someone from Nigeria to bounce ideas off. And each one brings a different perspective.
What is it going to take to create ventures that future generations will remember as having defined progress in our time? It's going to take the eloquence of a poet, the precision of a mathematician, and the drive of a soldier.
All of you will rank one another or vote on one another, and whoever gets the most support from their peers will get a $75,000 investment from First Light Ventures.
It's real money. It's not a game. The experience of having to rank people who you consider your brothers and sisters is a very, very difficult experience.
It's going to be tough, and it's always going to feel like doors are closing and doors are closing and people aren't getting what you're saying.
The entire institute, from start to finish, is mentor-driven. We're a mentor-intensive program.
Storytelling is how we communicate.
When you listen, you have to learn to listen with your soul.
We promised that we'd get you in front of a room of 100 investors. So what we're going to be doing is taking a 1,500-mile trip out to San Francisco. 22 entrepreneurs working on ventures in 15 countries, hailing from 6 continents, have presented before you today with a strong conviction that they will trailblaze the type of impact that we're all here and that we all hope to see.
This is a huge experiment. What we're doing, we don't know if it will reach the stars or if it's just going to flop. But what I do know, what I'm positive about, is that there's no experiment more worthy than this one.
So over the course of the next few minutes, I hope to break down and really illustrate what it is we do at the Unreasonable Institute and to go into some more depth as to what that video just touched on. About 6 months ago, I heard a story of another institute called the Highlander Institute. And this is a picture of the Highlander Institute. It existed really in its heyday in the mid-20th century, in the 1950s and 60s, and its goal was to combat the greatest social ills of its time, similar to our goal at the Unreasonable Institute. For the Highlander Institute, though, it existed in the South of the United States of America. And so for it, the greatest social ills of its time were racial segregation and racial inequality. And how it combated those issues was by training future leaders in the art of social activism and political activism. So that's all interesting, but what's most fascinating about the Highlander Institute is that what most people don't know is both Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King were trained at the Highlander Institute for 3 months before they went out on their campaigns for social action. So at the Unreasonable Institute, our goal is to become the Highlander Institute of the 21st century. But we no longer believe that these issues are regional, that they're domestic, that they're national. Instead, they're multinational. They transcend borders. And we also no longer believe that social activism is the most powerful solution at our disposal. Instead, we believe that that's entrepreneurship, that's business, and that's market-based solutions. But before I get into further detail with the Unreasonable Institute, I thought I should go back in time and tell you a little bit about myself. I started my first company when I was 11 years old. I was going into the 6th grade, and my dad said that I'd have to pay for half of everything. Half of your food, half of your clothing, half of your school supplies, half of your sporting gear. I mean, this was absurd. I was 11 years old. Where was I going to find that money, right? Nobody could employ me because that'd be child labor in the States. You can't, they wouldn't allow it at 11. And so I had to start my own thing. And running a paper route, which would have been really common, wouldn't make enough money. So I started doing what I loved, which was mowing lawns. And I went out there and I mowed one lawn, and then I got another one, I mowed another one, another one, another one. And by 2 years later, we had 120 lawns. We had 20 employees who were all my friends. We were all 11-year-olds. And we were out there, and we were landscaping and mowing lawns. And what was interesting about this experience was I loved it. I never saw a penny. I never saw a dime because my parents took all that money and put it in a bank account for college. But I loved it because I loved being outside. I loved mowing lawns. It made me really happy. What I noticed is that everybody seemed to be a little bit happier, though, because we had started this new business. The people whose lawns we mowed, they loved us. There's a bunch of 11 and 12-year-old boys working hard outside, having a lot of fun. All of my friends, it was amazing. They're getting paid $10, $20 an hour as 11 and 12-year-olds to play around outside. And myself, it just felt incredible to start this thing up. And so I quickly realized at a young age that through entrepreneurship, it seemed to me that we could make more people happy, that we could create more value through happiness instead of through money, because money was actually never my focus. And when I went to university, I went to the University of Colorado in Boulder. I had applied to 13 schools all around the country, all around the United States, and I was actually into all the programs I wanted to go to. So I thought I knew what I was going to do. I was going to go, I was going to go to Yale. I was going to study entrepreneurship. I was going to drop out after a year just for the story. And all of these different plans. The University of Colorado actually offered to fly my mom and I out to the school to visit. And so I flew out to Boulder, Colorado, which is where the university is, and it's just absolutely beautiful. And I knew that 12 hours later I was going to stay there, that I had to go to school in Boulder. There are really 3 reasons. One was that everybody you talk to who lives in Boulder seems to love Boulder. They use these wildly hyperbolic statements like heaven on earth, best place in the world. And I figured, well, heck, maybe I should listen. The second was the entrepreneurial community. It was really vibrant. Boulder only has about 90,000 people, yet Business Week ranked it one of the best cities in the country to start a business. Forbes ranked it most intelligent city in America. We have a new tech meetup. There's 9,000 individuals in this group in Boulder out of 90,000 people who are starting companies in the technology space or investing in companies. So it's incredibly vibrant, incredibly entrepreneurial, and that got me really excited. And the third reason I went to Boulder is I knew that I wouldn't have to drop out because the University of Colorado wasn't going to be as scholastically demanding as, say, Yale was. So I could go to school and I could start companies, and that's what I did. My freshman year, I went to school. I was studying math. I was studying finance and economics, and I quickly realized that 3 degrees doesn't give you much time to start companies, so I dropped all of those and I studied philosophy. And I did that because I love philosophy more than anything, but also because I never had to go to class. Maybe this is an inappropriate talk, but with philosophy, right, if you can read well and you can write and you enjoy it, I loved it, all I had to do was turn in 2 papers a semester. So actually I never had to go to class and I could start companies. So I challenged myself. Every project that I was a part of my freshman year in undergrad, I really want to challenge myself and our teams. Could we create an organization where every constituency that was affected by it was better off? Right? Of course, you are as the founders. Of course, your employees are. Of course, your shareholders are and your customers. But what about the communities we worked within? What about the environment? And what was most difficult was what about our competition? The basic idea, though, is if you can create an organization where every single constituency that's affected by it is better off, you're not just sustainable, you're thrivable. Because these organizations and all of these people affected by it, they're going to want to see your growth through. And so it was rooted largely in theory, but figured, hey, let's give it a shot. Let's try to start companies where nobody's exploited and instead everybody's better off. And the first company that I started was actually from an experience I had my first year in college, which was I was coming from out of state. And in the States, if you come from outside of a state, and I was coming from Illinois and I've studied in Chicago, or in Colorado, the difference in tuition is about $110,000 US over the course of 4 years. So it's massive. Right? But if you can get in-state tuition, you can save $110,000. So I went to school. Everybody told me that it was impossible to get in-state tuition. I went to the admissions office. They said that it's impossible. Only 2% of students ever get in-state tuition. But I really worked at it, and actually it only took about 30 hours. And so 30 hours of work, I had in-state tuition. I saved myself $110,000. And so I started going around and telling my friends who were also out-of-state students, saying, you guys are crazy. You know, put 30 hours of work in, and you'll get in-state tuition. And none of them believed me, so I told them, okay, well, I'll make you a deal. I'll work with you. We'll get you in-state tuition. If we get you in-state tuition, you'll save $110,000. Then I would just like 10% of that amount of money that you saved, right? It was actually a lot of money. That's $10,000 for just about 30 hours of work. And so out of that grew a company. And that company was called Tuition Specialists. Our goal was to make higher education more affordable for people who wanted to go to schools outside of their own state. Now, instantly, there was a big issue with this model, though, right? If we save you $110,000, the university loses $110,000. And so if we step back to that theoretical idea of we wanted to create companies where every single constituency was better off, this wasn't going to cut it. And so myself and the co-founders, we went into the tuition office and we talked to the head of admissions and we told him what we were doing. We said, look, we've already gotten 25 people in-state tuition. We've saved them $2.5 million, but that cost you $2.5 million. How can we work together? And of course, he was pretty upset. And we said, but no, told him, we're not going to do this unless you benefit from this as well. And so we put our heads together and we realized that the out-of-state population at the University of Colorado didn't have much diversity, and it actually wasn't attracting that much talent. And it didn't have much diversity because it was so expensive that when they went around the country and they recruited, they only went to suburban schools that were really wealthy and typically mostly Caucasian. They didn't go to inner city schools. The other side was they didn't attract much talent because if you're going to pay $30,000 US a year to go to school, you're just going to go to Stanford if you're that smart. And so we then teamed up with the university, we went around the country, and we attracted out-of-state diversity and talent. Right? And that business has thrived. It's been picked up by multiple universities, is now in multiple states. We were able to find a way to take a win-lose situation and make it a win-win situation. But there are even more wins with this situation. It turns out at the University of Colorado, the #1 pool where per capita there's the most people who are out of state are sorority girls. And so we targeted sorority girls as well those first couple of years. So one theme that you'll see throughout this talk is that it's really important to love what you do and to have fun. Also to focus on making situations where everybody benefits. The second company that I founded was really founded on this premise. This leaf is supposed to represent ecotourism. Right? When we look at ecotourism in emerging markets, it's a lot like coffee trade. That's why I have a coffee bean here. Coffee trade, there's typically 9, 10, 11 middlemen in any purchase from the producer to the consumer. In ecotourism, although it's not as bad, there may be 5, 6, or 7 middlemen, it's still really bad in the end result. There was just a study that was put out that said that local guides in emerging markets are on average now getting 9% of the price that you pay for a trip. So if you're a customer in New York and you're purchasing a trip to go on safari in Tanzania, that local guide, if you paid $1,000, is getting $90. Right? This is incredibly inefficient. So our goal with this company, which is called Sway Sports, is to create an efficient market, to connect a producer directly with the consumer, and to leverage the internet to do so. And this is actually founded on a premise. Bill Gates, he coined a phrase called creative capitalism. He was giving a talk to an audience about this size. There was about 200 individuals, and it was at Davos, and he was talking to Fortune 500 CEOs of multinational organizations, and he told them, he said, look, the emerging markets, the 2 billion people at the base of the pyramid, this is a huge opportunity. Right? This is the largest emerging market in the history of humankind. How dare we not approach it as businessmen? He said, but beyond businessmen, we're humans. And the needs in these markets, they're real. These aren't perceived needs. And so we can create products and services that actually meet the human needs of 2 billion people around the world. And so that was interesting, but where his talk got more compelling and a little bit unique was he said, but most importantly, if we're going to cross this chasm of global development, then we don't just need to innovate our products to emerging markets, we need to give emerging markets the ability to sell directly to our markets, so direct trade. And that's really the founding premise of Sway Sports. We started this company, once again, this theme of having fun. We started this company by biking. We biked from Canada down to Mexico. We did about a 2,800-mile bike ride, or about 4,000 kilometers. Along the Pacific coast, we met with 150 different adventure sports guides. We did every type of adventure sport you could imagine under the sun for free. It was a blast, and we launched a company. We actually signed about 140 of them as partners, and we launched this website after that trip, swaysports.com, and the goal here is to become the central home for adventure travel for ecotourism. It flopped. It failed miserably. And actually, we were looking at our competition, and we had 3 competitors, and all 3 of them went bankrupt. They all went out of business. And there was actually one more that still was standing, and actually they just called us and said that they want to give us their company. They've also folded their cards, and the reason that they all failed is they were trying to become this, a central home for adventure sports, right? An Expedia-like site for adventure travel where everybody in the world would come to your website. But the reality is, and this was just put out by Babson College, there's 3 million new websites being created every single month. Right? If we think we're going to be one of the 10 who stands out of those 3 million, we're either going to need one heck of a budget for advertising, or we're going to need a lot of luck, but not the kind that you can make. And so we completely reevaluated our business model, and we changed what we do to this. So we created a system that allows our partners like climbing.com or National Geographic to be able to embed our trips directly on their site. The belief is that the future of the internet is not about getting people to our website, it's about getting our content onto the places people already go. And so one of the things that I want to push throughout this talk is just the need to think creatively. When you fail, like we did, our company tanked. It's only a failure if you give up then, but if you learn from those lessons and you looked at why it didn't work, oftentimes I really think that you can pick yourself back up again and be much stronger. So after my freshman year, I'd been working on these companies. I was really fortunate to be part of a program in Prague called the Global Institute for Leadership and Civic Development. It's a very lofty name. But what they do is they bring together 40 young leaders from 25 countries all around the world. They bring them together in Prague for 5 weeks with one premise. The goal is to create global citizens, to develop this international empathetic response to the issues that we face. And they were actually really good at that. I remember when I walked in we had these communist block-style dorms, and actually in the middle of my dorm room there was a puddle of black water. And it was a very authentic experience. When I walked into the dorm, I saw my roommate, and he was unpacking all of his clothes. He had 2 massive suitcases, and everything was folded very neatly. I just had a backpack with a couple shirts, and I walked in, and I said, "Hey, my name is Daniel. I'm from the United States." And he goes, "Hi, my name is Orhan. I'm from Azerbaijan." And he said it in a way I had never heard of Azerbaijan, so I said, "Bless you," because it sounded like he had sneezed. Right? I was at this point in my life, and I'm the first to admit it, internationally ignorant. And the goal of this program over the course of 5 weeks was really to change that. And it did. And we looked at some tough issues. We looked at classism, at racism, at segregation, at sexism, at terrorism, and we did it within this international context and this international community. And one conversation stuck out more than any to me, and it was after 2 days of looking at women's rights and issues of sexism, and that day we talked about veiling and about burqas. And Orhan, my roommate, he was close to my age. He was just 2 years older. He had a photograph on his desk of his girlfriend at the time. And I had a photograph on my desk of my girlfriend at the time. And his girlfriend, she was wearing a full burqa. The only thing you could see were her eyes. My girlfriend, she was wearing a tank top and shorts and so on. And so I remember it was about 3 in the morning. Orhan and I were laying in bed. We're having one of these conversations, and we're just trying to understand each other. And I just can't understand where he's coming from, and he can't understand me. And so I sit up. It's 3 in the morning. I go, "Orhan, cut the bullshit. Tell me the truth. How do you feel when you look at your girlfriend and you see that she's fully veiled?" And he looks back at me, and he had a picture similar to this, and he said, "It's the most beautiful thing in the world." And I said, "Orhan, you have to explain that to me. What do you mean?" And he said, her eyes are a gateway to her soul. And the reason I love her is because of her soul, not what she looks like. Then he looks back at me and he says, "Well, how do you feel about your girlfriend?" And I was like, "Whoa." No. I I said that I believe she's beautiful on the inside and the outside, and I want her to be able to express that beauty in any way she wants. And for the first time ever, Orkhan and I both understood each other. It was a huge pivot. You could see it go off in both our minds. We had a complete paradigm shift. And so this program was exceptional at developing this international empathy, but it stopped there. And when I came back after 5 weeks, this is Boulder, Colorado, where we're based out of. When I came back to Boulder, I was frustrated, because I realized that we just spent 5 weeks with this incredible group of young, innovative people, and we didn't create anything. We didn't do anything. We didn't build anything. Instead, we just looked at issues. And when I reflected back on my education, I realized that my education in the classroom was largely issues-focused, right? We knew everything about classism, racism, segregation, and so on. But occasionally we would transcend issues and we'd look at theory. We'd say, once you are a future leader, once you do graduate, you can apply these skills and these lessons learned, but we never actually did anything. We never built anything. And I realized that there's just so much potential energy in that group of 40 young individuals in Prague that how dare we not do something with that? And so started an institute. This was after my freshman year. Started an institute called the Global Leadership Institute. And 3.5 years later, we launched it, and we brought together, there's 17 entrepreneurs from 14 countries in Boulder for 5 weeks. We were absolutely clueless as to what would come of this, but I knew two things, that we wanted to look at issues and we wanted to look at solutions. And the only type of solutions that we were going to investigate were solutions that could match the magnitude of these challenges that we were facing. Initially, when we started this, we wondered if there would be a demand, right? Would people actually come out to this? This was a bunch of 20-something-year-olds in Colorado trying to attract young entrepreneurs from around the world, and it was amazing. This is actually just a sampling of about half the countries that applied the first year that we launched this program. But truth be told, this program was also a failure. I looked up on Google "sad puppy," and this is what came up. After we launched that institute, it was spectacular in terms of the impact. 8 of those entrepreneurs created organizations that still exist to this very day. And that was miraculous, because we really didn't know what we were doing. But at the same rate, it was a failure. Actually, somebody who was helping me run this program tried to sue me. In the aftermath, I wanted to give the program to the entrepreneurs. They wanted to keep the program to themselves. And although nothing went to litigation or anything like that, it destroyed me. I lost a lot of faith in people. I was really trying to do something that I thought was very pure and very good, give this program to the entrepreneurs. And I couldn't believe that somebody wanted to step in the way. And I remember I went into the office of the dean of the entrepreneurship school at the University of Colorado. His name's Paul Jurdy. He's a personal mentor at Unreasonable. I went into his offices and I was crushed. I was in episodic depression, right? I'd been working on this for 3.5 years and I lost it. And I felt awful about it. And I was sitting in his office and I was telling him why, this was ruined, it was never going to happen again, and so on. And he looks up at me, he tells me to raise my head up, and he says, "You're the luckiest guy I've seen in 2 months." And I said, "Paul, what are you talking about, luckiest guy you've seen in 2 months?" He said, "You just learned one of the most valuable lessons of your life as an entrepreneur, that you should contract people, even if they're good friends. You want to put expectations on paper for the both of you." And he said, "And it didn't cost you anything." And he goes, "And I'll tell you what, you're going to step out of my office, you're going to do it again, and you're going to do it twice as good, because you're going to apply every lesson that you learned." And I did. I walked out of his office as one of the luckiest guys that I knew, and that was really the birth of the Unreasonable Institute. The first thing we did with the Unreasonable Institute is we looked at competition. At least initially, this is how we were thinking about it. We said, okay, what are all the organizations around the world? There's about 160 that we've identified that are working with early stage social entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs in emerging markets, and how are they helping them? And I'd call these organizations. My research was really simple. Call them, get them on the phone, talk to whoever picks up and say, okay, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? How are you doing it? What works and what doesn't work? And just have these conversations. And it happened over and over and over and over again. And eventually what we realized, and this is one of the things that we're really proud of at the Unreasonable Institute, is we turned all those competitors into partners. Right? The basic idea of always create an organization where every constituency affected is better off. And today we actually have just over 150 partners operating in almost every country of the world, helping us find these entrepreneurs and helping us help these entrepreneurs as they move forward through the life cycle of their ventures. But every organization and every entrepreneur you talk to, they're supposed to talk about one thing when they describe their business, and it's their secret sauce. And at the Unreasonable Institute, our secret sauce is really no secret. It's that we are a mentor-driven program. This is a sample of the mentors that we bring together. I mentioned them earlier. We bring about 60 of them together, but they don't just come and talk to our entrepreneurs and teach our entrepreneurs and lead workshops with our entrepreneurs. They live with them. This is where the magic happens. We have 60 mentors. We bring in 30 capital partners, which are 30 venture funds from around the world. We fly in their managing partners. We bring in these mentors. We bring in the entrepreneurs, and everybody lives together under the same roof. This is a photo of the Unreasonable Institute. This is about 2:30 in the morning, and as you can see, everybody's still working and everybody's still cranking. This is a common theme. I'd walk into the house at 2 in the morning, and I'd see an entrepreneur around a whiteboard with two mentors, and then I'd come back at 6 a.m. just 4 hours later, and now there'd be 3 mentors and 6 entrepreneurs around this whiteboard. We really believe in the power of relationships. We believe that business is people, and the most important thing we can do for our entrepreneurs is connect them to these mentors and to these capital providers and create the context in which they can really build relationships, which to us means they need to be roommates. They need to brush their teeth together. They need to eat dinner together, stay up late together. When we first created the Unreasonable Institute, this is a question that every single business that's launched should ask itself is your customer interested, and will your customer pay? And in the first year of creating the Institute, we had applications from over 70 countries, so we knew that they were interested. But our next question was, will they pay? And we had a huge issue, which is we wanted to charge our entrepreneurs, but we also knew that that wouldn't be fair. That at least half of our entrepreneurs, there's no way they could afford the cost of tuition to get into the Unreasonable Institute. So we stuck our heads together and we tried to think creatively, try to overcome this hurdle, and we created this. This is what we call the Finalist Marketplace. And it's a website. So this past year, we had a couple hundred applications. We conducted 112 interviews. Out of those interviews, we selected 50 finalists, and we challenged them. We put them up on this website, and we said the first 25 out of you 50 finalists to raise the cost of attending the Institute, you'll get into the program. And so they had to crowdsource it, but instantly we realized another huge issue, which is literally this past year, we had a former child soldier, Congolese refugee, competing against a 4-time serial entrepreneur out of Boston. Right? This wasn't fair. They had to raise $8,000 online. And the issue was this Bostonian serial entrepreneur could call up his uncle and say, hey, I need $8,000. Can you put it into this website? They'd get into the program instantly, and it wasn't a test of their entrepreneurial mettle. So what we did is in the first week of this marketplace, we challenged our entrepreneurs a little bit more. We said that the most you can raise from any individual is $10. And the second week, the most you could raise is $50. And the third week, it was $100, and so on and so forth. And the idea here was, let's test their entrepreneurial mettle, right? And what better way than to challenge them to galvanize financial support from hundreds of individuals? Ultimately, this was a huge experiment, but this past year, our entrepreneurs raised over $250,000 in 36 days from over 4,000 people in just shy of 70 countries. And so it was amazing. The world came together, and they voted, and they selected these entrepreneurs. Another experiment that we ran our first year was to answer this question: what would happen if entrepreneurs could invest in each other? And we decided that we'll find out. And I know Artemisia is now doing this with Village Capital as well, but we teamed up with a venture capital fund out of Atlanta called First Light Ventures, and we created something called Village Capital with them. The basic premise here was inspired by village banking methodologies, where if I'm going to generalize, let's go to India. We're in India. This is a microfinance group, and within your group, you have a self-help group. So it's you and typically 4 other individuals. So there's a group of 5, and you have to give a loan out to that group. Well, you select one individual within your group to give that loan to. That individual then goes out and they start a business, and then they repay that loan, ideally within a few months. It comes back to the group, and then you select the next person to give it to. We decided, let's do this with venture capital. And so our entrepreneurs at the end of the Institute, they circled up, they got together, they pitched to each other, and they selected 3 entrepreneurs amongst each other to receive a $75,000 investment. It was a huge, huge experiment, but the premise was that there'd be nobody who would be more fit to understand these entrepreneurs than themselves, because they had just lived together for the past 6 weeks. Another thing that we focus on is not just Village Capital, but it's getting them in front of larger pools of financing. And we do this 2 ways. One is, as you saw in that video, we brought our entrepreneurs out to San Francisco. We did that again this past year. But the second is that we actually bring the venture capitalists to Boulder. And so we fly, like I mentioned, 30 venture capital funds out to Boulder to live with the entrepreneurs throughout the summer. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this is something we value more than anything, which is it's important to take risks and to constantly experiment. And we are at the Unreasonable Institute. We're playing with our model. We're iterating in big ways. We're starting new companies spinning off of Unreasonable. And the only thing that we say is that we're going to make these wild and audacious experiments. We're going to take these risks, but we're going to try to do it in an intelligent way, in a way where we really care for all of the people who are affected by these risks. So beyond the Unreasonable Institute, though, I wanted to talk about you. And actually, a big inspiration for me was reading a book by an author called Jim Collins. Or his name's Jim Collins, and the book is called Good to Great. Has anybody here read that book? Show of hands. Nice, not many. That's awesome. The book's good. It's not great, but there's one section in it where he talks about what he calls the hedgehog concept, and he says that there's a trifecta, and if you can find your place between these three circles, then you will achieve your wildest dreams. And the first circle is talent. Right? He asks, what are you naturally and genetically wired to do? And so I'm asking you guys now, what are you naturally and genetically wired to do? What are you most talented at? For me, just like Jim Collins, I used to think that this was math until I sat in a hypothetical calculus class and realized that I'm not genetically wired to do this when I looked around at my peers. Right? The question here is just, what are you absolutely best at? The second is, how are you going to make a living? And this is really important. It's make a living, right? This isn't make a fortune. It's how are you going to make a living doing what it is you're naturally talented to do. And I actually think that Jim should pause here and point that if you have the intersection of these two circles, this is wildly dangerous. Right? This is a lot of my friends who are out on Wall Street, who are iBankers, who are really good at financing, who are making tons of money, but it stops there, and they're just not happy. So the third one that Jim Collins talks about is passion. He says, what would you do where you could wake up in the morning if you were doing this and you would say, oh my God, I am so lucky. I get paid to do this. This is crazy. Right? I'm the luckiest person in the world. So Jim believes that if you have the intersection of these three circles, that you will lead a happy and fulfilling life. But actually, I disagree, because I think we can easily imagine somebody who has these three circles and isn't happy. And so maybe that's a rock star, right, who's really talented on stage, loves being on stage, is making wicked amounts of money, but for some reason still isn't fulfilled, and for some reason is still depressed. And I think the fourth circle that's missing here is CTFW, right? Change the fucking world. What are you doing that's going to have an impact? And if you can find the intersection of these four circles, I think that this leads to fulfillment, and as an entrepreneur, there's nothing less that you should focus on. There's nothing less that you should ever settle for, because if you're in this room, you don't need to settle. One of my issues with this diagram, though, is that the point is so small, so I'd like to change that. So if you have passion or flow, talent, if you're making a living and you're changing the fucking world, you're really doing something right. But once you found that idea, that's not enough. Right? So the last three things I want to talk about are entrepreneurship, risk and failure, and the importance of luck. And I put a hand here because entrepreneur is a French word, and at the root of it, it means to take into one's own hands. Right? So once you have this idea, once you figured out what just gets you on fire, you have to take it into your own hands. You have to defy the skeptics. People will tell you over and over and over again that this is impossible. The challenges will seem insurmountable, but if you take it into your own hands, you don't fear failure. In fact, you embrace it, and you think with a lucky perspective, I think you'll really make it. So Babe Ruth, he's best known for 70 years he held the world record for home runs. Does anybody know the world record that Babe Ruth still holds today? It's crazy. He still holds the world record for the most strikeouts in the history of Major League Baseball. Thomas Edison, when he was creating the light bulb, he tried thousands of different iterations to create the light bulb, and nothing worked. And there's this famous story where a reporter comes up to Thomas Edison and asks him, she goes, "What are you doing? You have failed thousands of times. How are you still working on this?" And he looks at the reporter. He says, "I didn't fail. I learned 1,000 different ways not to make the light bulb." Right? It's all about perspective. Another story, Tom Watson, he was the former CEO of IBM. And there's a story that he hired on a new employee. She came into the company at a senior level 2 weeks into the job. She made a decision without asking anybody that lost the company millions of dollars. Right? So Tom Watson calls her into his office, sits her down in front of him, and says, "What do you think I'm going to do?" And she goes, "You're going to fire me." And he goes, "Are you kidding me? We just spent millions of dollars on your education. the last thing I'm going to do is fire you, right? Because failure, if we look at it with a different paradigm, is about learning from our mistakes and about applying them into the future. Along with failure is this notion of risk, though, and oftentimes we call this the saline paradox, which is when you set sail, when you go to sea, you always wish, safe, tranquil, and peaceful voyages, right? You wish a calm sea, but when you come back from that trip and you dock your boat, the only stories that you're going to talk about, it's not the safe and tranquil seas, it's the rough, tumultuous storms, right? It's the adventures where the boat almost capsized. Those are the moments in your life that are pivotal. Those are the moments in your life where you really find yourself. And so along with this notion of failure is this importance of embracing risk and actually learning to love risk. Another study going back to this notion of luck, done by these scientists in the UK, was focused on relationships. They found a relationship psychiatrist who worked with male patients, and her goal was to help them get a date, right, to help them build relationships. And so she had all these patients, and oftentimes her techniques would work, but she had one patient where nothing would work, right? He's 40 years old. He hasn't kissed a girl in his entire life. He hasn't been on a date yet. He loves women. He loves being around them, but he gets so nervous that he can't even speak to them. So we need to name this guy. What should his name be? Anybody? What was that? Bob? Bob, okay, Bob. So his name's Bob, right? So Bob's sitting there in her office, and the scientists, they come up to the psychiatrist, and they say, hey, we have an idea. Can you run this experiment? She says, great. And so she's sitting there in the office with the psychiatrist, and she says, look, Bob, I'm going to ask you to do something, and you have to do it, right? You have to promise me that you'll do it, and I promise you that you'll overcome your fear. Bob looks back at her and says, no way, right? I'm not going to do whatever you tell me to do. She goes, no, Bob, I'll make you a deal. If you do this and it doesn't work, then I'll give you all your money back, and all of your sessions will be paid for. And if it does work, then you get cured. And so Bob says, great. So he says, yes, I'll do it. And she goes, no, Bob, I need you to commit. I need you to promise me that you'll do this. And he says, okay, I promise I'll do this. She says, great. She says, go out and fail 75 times. You need to go out and you need to ask 75 women out on a date, and you need to get rejected 75 times in a row. And although we're running out of time now in this talk, but what happened was Bob went out there, and he asked one woman out on a date. She said no. Asked another one. She said no. Asked another one. She said no. Another one, no. But the ninth one said yes, right? Of course she said yes. You can only ask so many people before you get a yes. So he calls him psychiatrist and says, I'm cured. I got a date. She goes, well, how many times did you fail? He said 8 times. She goes, that's not good enough. You promised 75, right? So he goes back out there. He asks another girl out on a date, asks another girl, fails, but then the 5th time gets a yes. And gets another yes. And this experiment, and this is a true story, Bob walks out of it. He can't fail 75 times in 30 days, and he gets 8 dates, right? A man who had never had a date in his entire life, never been able to talk to women, after 30 days has 8 dates. And if you want to, after the talk, I'll tell you about this. We ran a 2-year social experiment called the Project Paradox, where we did this across multiple campuses across the United States. And we actually actively ran a social experiment, asking women out on dates and having women ask men out on dates. And it allowed us to overcome our fear of failure and to really get over these social constructions of what is right and what is wrong. I'll end with a quote from Wayne Gretzky. I was actually born in Canada, in Vancouver, and I've become a huge fan of Wayne Gretzky. Not because he's touted as the best hockey player of all time, but because of his amazing cheesy one-liners of wisdom. And he has a lot of these quotes. And one time he was asked by a reporter after he wins the Stanley Cup, he's the MVP of hockey, so he is ranked best hockey player in the world. She asked him, what makes you so good? And Wayne looks at her and he says, a good hockey player skates to where the puck is. A great hockey player skates to where the puck's going to be. And if I were to argue anything in this room, it's that the bottom of the pyramid or the base of the pyramid, the 2 billion people living on less than $2 a day, yes, this is the base of the pyramid, but it's also the largest emerging market in the history of humankind. And if we're going to seize this opportunity of entrepreneurs, as entrepreneurs, we need to skate to where the puck is going to be. And it's our goal at the Unreasonable Institute to help those entrepreneurs skate to where that puck is going to be. So with that, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.